The summer sun beat down on the dusty roads of Texas like an angry fist. Captain Friedrich Weber sat in the back of the military truck, his hands bound loosely with rope. Around him, 20 other German soldiers swayed with each bump in the road. They were prisoners of war now. The year was 1944, and the world was tearing itself apart. Weber looked at the faces of his men. Young Otto Braun, barely 19, stared out at the endless flat landscape with wide eyes. Sergeant Hans Richter sat quietly, his jaw tight. They had all heard the stories back in Germany. American camps were brutal places. Torture, starvation, death. That is what the officers had told them before they shipped out to fight. But something felt different here. The truck passed through a gate marked Camp Swift and rolled to a stop. American soldiers with rifles stood waiting, but their faces were not cruel. One of them, a corporal with dark hair and brown skin, even smiled slightly. Weber found this confusing. Why would a guard smile at enemy prisoners? "Welcome to Texas, gentlemen," the corporal said in clear English. His name tag read Martinez. He gestured toward a row of wooden barracks. "You will stay here. There are beds, showers, and hot food. Follow the rules, and you'll be treated fairly." Otto whispered in German to Weber. "Captain, is this a trick? Are they softening us before the real treatment begins?" Weber did not answer. He was a tank commander before his capture in France just 2 months ago. The Americans had overwhelmed his position with superior numbers and air support. He had fought in Poland, France, and Russia. He knew war, but this place did not feel like war. It felt strange, almost peaceful. The heat was unbearable. Weber had fought in the deserts of North Africa with Rommel's Afrika Korps in 1942. He thought he knew heat, but Texas heat was different. It was thick and heavy, like breathing through wet wool. Sweat poured down his face as they marched to the barracks. Inside, the building was simple but clean. Rows of metal beds lined the walls. Each man got a mattress, a thin blanket, and a pillow. There were windows with screens to keep out insects. At the far end stood a wood stove for winter, though Weber could not imagine this place ever being cold. "Better than our barracks in Normandy," Hans muttered, touching the mattress with surprise. That evening, they received their first meal as prisoners. Real potatoes, bread with butter, some kind of meat stew. It was not fancy, but it was hot and filling. Otto ate slowly, savoring every bite. He had not eaten this well in months, even before his capture. "Why do they feed us so well?" Otto asked. The propaganda said Americans were weak and wasteful. But if they can feed prisoners like this while fighting a war on 2 fronts, Weber understood what the boy meant. Germany was starving. Even soldiers struggled to find enough food. Yet here, enemy prisoners ate warm meals every day. What did that say about America's strength? The next morning, they were assigned to work details. Some men went to pick cotton in nearby fields. Others helped repair roads or work in camp maintenance. Weber's group was sent to clear brush along the fence line. Corporal Martinez supervised them. As they worked, Weber noticed strange things. Outside the camp, beyond the fences, he saw wooden structures being built. Circular pens made of rough timber. Tall poles with crossbeams. Stacks of rope and leather equipment. American soldiers practiced with long coiled ropes, throwing loops through the air and catching fence posts. "What is that training for?" Weber asked Hans quietly in German. "Some kind of cavalry technique," Hans suggested. "Perhaps for jungle warfare in the Pacific. The Americans are fighting Japan in the islands." Weber made mental notes. As an officer, he felt it was his duty to observe everything. When Germany won the war, this intelligence might be valuable. Though lately, a small voice in his head whispered that victory was becoming less certain. The D-Day invasion in June had succeeded. Allied forces were pushing through France. The war was turning. Over the next 2 weeks, activity outside the camp increased. Trucks arrived, carrying livestock. Weber watched with fascination as cowboys unloaded massive bulls with curved horns. These were not the gentle dairy cattle he knew from Bavaria. These animals looked wild and dangerous. Their eyes rolled with fury as they kicked at the wooden chutes. Horses arrived too. not the disciplined cavalry horses of the German army. These horses bucked and reared, fighting against their handlers. It took 3 strong men to control a single animal. What kind of military needed such violent beasts? Perhaps they are training for mounted charges, Otto suggested one evening. Like the Polish cavalry that charged our tanks in 1939. Weber frowned. That ended badly for the Poles. Surely the Americans learned that lesson. But the mystery deepened. American soldiers practiced mounting and dismounting these wild horses at high speed. They tied knots in ropes faster than Weber thought possible. They chased calves through the pens and threw lassos around their necks with perfect accuracy. One afternoon, Colonel Harrison, the camp commander, walked along the fence line. He was a tall man with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. He stopped to watch Weber's work detail. "You boys doing all right in this heat?" Harrison asked. Martinez translated. Weber nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. We are managing." Harrison smiled. "Good. Listen, we are having a special event this Saturday. A little entertainment for the men and the local community. I'm selecting prisoners with good conduct to attend as observers. Would you and your men be interested?" Weber's heart raced. "An event? What kind of event? A military demonstration? Combat training exercises? This could be valuable intelligence." "We would be honored, Colonel," Weber said through Martinez. That night, Weber lay on his bed, unable to sleep. The mystery consumed him. All the signs pointed to some new form of military training. The wild animals, the rope techniques, the physical conditioning. But why would they let prisoners watch? Unless they wanted to send a message. To show Germany how advanced American tactics had become. Outside, the Texas night filled with strange sounds. Crickets chirped in rhythms Weber had never heard. Somewhere in the distance, a bull bellowed. The stars were brighter here than anywhere he had ever been, even the Russian steppes. Otto climbed down from his top bunk. "Captain, do you think we will ever go home?" Weber looked at the young soldier. Just a boy, really. Too young for war. Too young to die, so far from home. "Yes, Otto. One day, when this madness ends, we will go home." But Weber wondered what home would look like. Would Germany still exist? Would his family still be alive? The Allied bombing campaign was destroying German cities night after night. Hamburg, Berlin, Cologne, all burning. Saturday could not come fast enough. Whatever the Americans were planning to show them, Weber would observe every detail. He would be ready. A soldier always prepared for anything, or so he thought. The smell of fresh-cut lumber filled the morning air as Hans Richter hammered nails into fence posts. 5 days had passed since Colonel Harrison's invitation. The mysterious Saturday event was only 2 days away now. Hans could not stop thinking about it. Around the camp, preparations continued at a frantic pace. American soldiers and local civilian workers built something massive just beyond the prisoner compound. Hans could see it taking shape through the chain-link fence. A large oval arena with wooden bleachers on one side. A complex system of gates and chutes on the other. Everything built from rough timber and steel pipes. "It looks like a Roman amphitheater," Otto said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I saw pictures in school, where gladiators fought." Hans considered this. Maybe it is a combat demonstration arena. The Americans are very theatrical. Everything is a show with them. This was true. Hans had noticed how different Americans were from German soldiers. German military culture valued discipline, silence, and rigid order. But American soldiers laughed loudly, played music during breaks, and treated military service almost casually. Yet they fought with brutal efficiency. Hans had witnessed this firsthand in France. The irony troubled him. How could such a relaxed people create such an effective war machine? Germany had the finest military tradition in Europe. Prussian discipline, strategic genius, superior tanks and aircraft at the war's beginning. Yet now, in mid-1944, Germany was losing on every front. The Soviets pushed from the east. Their T-34 tanks and endless waves of infantry ground down German positions mile by bloody mile. Hans had friends who disappeared into Russian prisoner camps. None ever returned. He considered himself lucky to have been captured by Americans instead. From the west, British and American forces advanced through France after the D-Day landings. Hans had been at Normandy. He remembered the morning of June 6, 1944. The sky had filled with Allied aircraft like a swarm of locusts. Naval guns pounded the beaches with shells the size of automobiles. German commanders promised reinforcements that never came. Many of his unit died in those first hours. Those who survived surrendered within 2 weeks. Sergeant Richter, Corporal Martinez called out, "Colonel Harrison wants to see the prisoners selected for Saturday. Follow me." Hans gathered Weber, Otto, and 7 other Germans. They marched to the administration building, a simple structure with a green roof. Inside, the building was cool and dark, a relief from the blazing sun. Colonel Harrison sat behind a wooden desk covered with papers and maps. He looked up and smiled. "Gentlemen, please sit." Chairs were brought. Hans found this shocking. No German officer would invite prisoners to sit in his presence. Americans had such strange customs. Harrison spoke slowly, and Martinez translated into German. "I want to explain what you will see on Saturday. It is important that you understand this is not a military exercise. It is a sporting event. A rodeo. Do you know this word?" The Germans looked at each other blankly. None had heard the term before. Harrison continued. "A rodeo is a competition where cowboys test their skills with horses and cattle. It is entertainment, like a football match or a boxing tournament. There is no military purpose. I tell you this because I do not want confusion or fear. You will be safe. You will simply watch." Weber spoke carefully in broken English. "Cowboys? With horses and bulls? We see the animals. Very dangerous animals. Your men practice much with ropes." "Yes," Harrison nodded. "Cowboys are men who work on ranches. They manage cattle herds. The skills you see them practicing, roping, riding, controlling animals, these are work skills, not combat skills. But they require great courage and talent. We celebrate this with competitions." After the meeting, Weber gathered his men in the barracks. "The colonel says it is not military training, but I do not believe him. Why would they show us if it was not important? Why let enemy prisoners attend? Maybe it is propaganda," Hans suggested, "to show us American strength, to break our spirits." Otto shook his head. "I spoke with one of the guards yesterday. He said his whole family is coming. His children. Why bring children to a military demonstration?" This detail troubled Weber. Nothing made sense. In his 38 years, he had never heard of such a thing. Dangerous animals, skilled riders, public celebration, all mixed together for entertainment? It seemed wasteful, irrational, very American. The next day, Friday, brought new mysteries. Trucks arrived carrying what Martinez called bucking chutes. These were narrow metal cages on wheels, just wide enough for one bull or horse. Workers positioned them along one side of the arena. Hans watched as they tested the gates. They swung open with a violent crash, releasing whatever animal waited inside. "Why cage the animals like this?" Hans asked Martinez during a water break. Martinez grinned. "You will see tomorrow, amigo. Those chutes are where the magic starts." More trucks came throughout the day. One carried huge speakers and amplification equipment. Another brought American flags and colorful bunting to decorate the arena. A third delivered barrels, hundreds of them, which workers arranged in a cloverleaf pattern inside the ring. Late in the afternoon, the bulls arrived. Hans stood frozen as workers unloaded them. These were not farm animals. They were monsters. Each weighed over a ton, all muscle and fury. Their horns spread wide enough to impale 2 men at once. They snorted and bellowed, slamming against the trailer walls with sickening thuds. "Mein Gott, Otto Visperet. They're going to fight those creatures." A young American cowboy overheard and laughed. "Fight them? Son, we're going to ride them." Otto's face went pale. Hans felt his own stomach twist. Ride those beasts? Impossible. Suicidal. Even the best German cavalry officers would refuse such madness. That evening, the selected prisoners polished their boots and straightened their uniforms. Despite being prisoners, they maintained military pride. If Americans would see them tomorrow, They would represent Germany with dignity. Weber sat on his bunk, writing in a small notebook he had hidden from the guards. He sketched the arena layout, the chute system, the holding pens. Everything might be useful intelligence someday, though doubt crept into his mind more each day. Germany was not winning this war. The invasion of Normandy proved that. Allied forces now controlled most of France. It was only a matter of time. "Do you think the war will end soon?" Otto asked quietly. Weber closed his notebook. "Yes. One way or another, it will end soon. And then we go home and rebuild. Germany will need good men to rise from the ashes." Hans lay in his bunk, listening to the night sounds. Tomorrow would bring answers to the mysteries that had consumed them for weeks. He found himself actually excited, like a child before Christmas. When had he last felt excitement? Not since before the war. Not since his wedding day in 1938, before everything turned dark. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. The sound carried across the flat Texas landscape, lonely and wild. Hans closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would be a day to remember. Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies and scorching heat. Weber woke before dawn, his mind racing. Today, all questions would be answered. He dressed carefully in his cleanest prison uniform, the faded gray shirt and pants marked with POW in white letters that by 10 o'clock. 50 German prisoners stood in formation outside the barracks. American guards surrounded them, rifles ready but not threatening. Martinez smiled at the group. "Relax, gentlemen. You're going to enjoy this. I promise." They marched toward the arena. As they drew closer, Weber's confusion grew. Hundreds of American civilians were already there. Families with children, old men with weathered faces, women in colorful dresses. They carried picnic baskets and blankets. Children ran freely, laughing and chasing each other. This could not be a military demonstration. Not with civilians present. Not with such a carnival atmosphere. The guards led the German prisoners to a section of wooden bleachers set apart from the main crowd. Armed soldiers positioned themselves at both ends, but they seemed relaxed. One even bought lemonade from a vendor and shared it with the prisoners. Otto accepted a paper cup of the cold, sweet drink and stared at it in wonder. "Sergeant Richter, what is happening? This feels like a festival, not a military event." Hans had no answer. He scanned the growing crowd. Over 1,000 people now filled the stands. Music played from the speakers, a lively sound with guitars and fiddles. Americans called it country music. It was simple but energetic, nothing like the classical compositions or military marches Hans knew. Suddenly, the music stopped. A voice boomed across the arena, amplified by the speakers. A man in a white cowboy hat stood in the center of the ring, holding a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Camp Swift Charity Rodeo." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The announcer continued, speaking rapidly in English thick with Texas accent. Martinez translated quietly for the Germans. "Today we celebrate the brave cowboys of Texas and raise money for our boys fighting overseas. We have the finest riders from 3 counties here today. We have bulls meaner than a rattlesnake with a toothache. And we're going to show you 8 seconds of pure American courage." Weber leaned forward, trying to understand. 8 seconds? Courage? What did time have to do with anything? The announcer called out the first event. Bareback bronc riding. A gate crashed open. A horse exploded into the arena like a bomb going off. On its back clung a young cowboy, one hand gripping a leather strap, the other waving wildly in the air. The horse twisted and bucked with insane violence, trying to throw the rider off. The German prisoners gasped collectively. Weber gripped the wooden bench. This was not training. This was barely controlled chaos. The horse spun in tight circles, its back arching impossibly high. The rider's body whipped back and forth like a rag doll. His hat flew off. His face showed intense concentration and pain. Then, after what seemed like an eternity but was only 5 seconds, the cowboy lost his grip. He flew through the air and slammed into the dirt. The crowd made a sympathetic sound. The cowboy rolled to his feet, limping but smiling. He waved to the audience. They cheered and clapped. 2 men on horses, Martinez called them pickup men, caught the wild horse, and led it from the arena. Otto stared with his mouth open. He fell. He failed the test. Why are they cheering? He stayed on for 5 seconds, Martinez explained. That takes real skill. Most men cannot stay on for 2 seconds. 3 more riders attempted the bareback bronc event. Only one managed to stay on for the full 8 seconds required. When he succeeded, the crowd went wild. The announcer declared him the winner, and the cowboy tipped his hat, grinning widely despite blood running from his nose that Weber's mind raced. This made no military sense whatsoever. Men deliberately climbing onto violent animals with no saddle, no real equipment, just to see if they could stay on for 8 seconds? And they called this achievement? Germans prized efficiency, engineering, and tactical brilliance. This was pure, reckless bravado. Next came bull riding. Weber felt his chest tighten as workers loaded one of the massive bulls into a bucking chute. The animal crashed against the metal walls, bellowing with rage. A cowboy climbed the chute fence and lowered himself onto the bull's back. He wrapped a rope around his hand while the bull thrashed beneath him. "This is suicide," Hans muttered in German. "That animal will kill him." The gate opened. The bull burst out spinning and twisting with terrifying power. Its back legs kicked higher than Weber's head. The cowboy bounced like a rubber ball, his body absorbing impacts that should have broken bones. His free arm never touched the bull. Martinez explained that touching with both hands meant disqualification. The bull jumped and spun. The cowboy held on. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. The crowd counted loudly. 5 seconds. 6 seconds. The bull reversed direction suddenly. 7 seconds. The buzzer sounded. 8 seconds. The cowboy released his hand and tried to jump clear, but his rope caught. He dangled from the side of the still spinning bull, his hand trapped. Weber stood up, alarmed. Other spectators screamed. 2 rodeo clowns ran into the arena, men in painted faces and baggy clothes. They distracted the bull, while a third man freed the cowboy's hand. The rider fell to the ground and scrambled toward the fence as the bull charged. The clowns danced and waved, drawing the bull's attention away. It was coordinated chaos, practiced and purposeful. When the cowboy reached safety, the crowd exploded with applause. He stood and raised both arms in victory, despite his hand being clearly injured. "Madness," Weber said in German. "Complete madness." But he could not look away. Event after event followed. Saddle bronc riding, where cowboys used a specialized saddle but still faced incredible violence. Steer wrestling, where riders jumped from running horses onto running cattle and wrestled them to the ground by twisting their horns. Tie-down roping, where cowboys chased calves at full gallop, roped them, jumped off their horses, and tied 3 of the calves' legs together in seconds. Then came barrel racing. A young woman on a beautiful horse entered the arena. She wore a bright blue shirt and a cowboy hat. The announcer called her name Miss Sarah Henderson, daughter of Big Jack Henderson, riding Thunderbolt. Weber noticed something incredible. The crowd cheered as loudly for her as they had for any man. She raced her horse in a cloverleaf pattern around 3 barrels, leaning so far into the turns that her stirrup nearly touched the ground. The horse responded to her slightest movement, accelerating and turning with perfect precision. She crossed the finish line in record time. "Women compete also?" Weber asked Martinez in surprise. "Of course," Martinez replied. "Barrel racing is mostly women. They're some of the best riders we have." Hans shook his head slowly. In Germany, women stayed away from combat and dangerous activities. It was not proper. But here, this girl received equal celebration for equal courage. Another American mystery. As the afternoon progressed, something changed in Weber. The initial shock faded. He began to see the skill involved. Each cowboy prepared differently. Each had his own style and technique. Success required strength, but also timing, balance, and reading the animal's movements. These were not mindless acts of violence. They were competitions of refined ability. The crowd's enthusiasm was genuine. These people truly admired the cowboy's courage and talent. They understood the difficulty of what they watched. When a rider succeeded, everyone celebrated. When a rider failed but showed heart, they still applauded. Intermission arrived after 2 hours of continuous action. The speakers played music while the arena was cleared and prepared for the final events. Weber sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything he had witnessed. Martinez appeared with paper cones of cold lemonade for the German prisoners. He sat down next to Weber and Otto, grinning widely. "So, gentlemen, what do you think of your first rodeo?" Weber struggled to find words. His English was limited, but he tried. "This is not military training?" Martinez laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. "Military training? No, Captain. This is just for fun. Entertainment. Sport. Like boxing or football. But the danger," Otto protested in his careful English. "Men could die. We saw one almost trampled." "Yes," Martinez agreed, his smile fading slightly. "Rodeo is dangerous. Men do die sometimes. But we choose this danger. We celebrate it. It is part of our culture, our heritage." Weber shook his head. "I do not understand. Nobody risks death for entertainment. There must be purpose. Training for cavalry? Testing courage for soldiers." Martinez considered his answer carefully. "Let me tell you a story. My grandfather came to Texas from Mexico in 1880. He worked on a ranch, herding cattle across hundreds of miles of wild country. Every day was dangerous. Wild horses, angry bulls, snakes, storms. No doctors for 50 miles. He learned to rope and ride because his life depended on it. Those skills kept him alive." Otto leaned forward, listening intently. "Now," Martinez continued, "times are changing. We have trucks and trains. We do not need cowboys the way we once did. But we do not want to forget those skills, that courage, that way of life. So we made it into a competition, a celebration. We honor our grandfathers by keeping their traditions alive." For the first time, Weber began to understand. He thought of his own childhood in Bavaria. His village had festivals each year. Men competed in wrestling and stone lifting. They drank beer and sang old songs. Was this so different? Just louder, more dangerous, more American? A civilian family sat nearby, an old rancher with his wife and grandson. The old man noticed Weber's confusion and spoke to him in surprisingly good German. "You are wondering why we do this, yes?" Weber nodded, shocked to hear his language spoken by a Texan. "I am Jacob Mueller," the old man said. "My father came from Germany in 1875. I grew up speaking both languages. I know how Germans think." He smiled gently. "You see waste where we see celebration. You see risk where we see freedom. This is the difference between our peoples." Hans joined the conversation. "But such danger for no purpose? In Germany, we believe in efficiency. If something serves no practical function, it is wasteful." Mueller nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But let me ask you, Sergeant, does music serve a practical function? Does art? Do the mother's lullaby? Or do these things feed something deeper in the human soul?" The question silenced the Germans. Mueller continued. "These cowboys risk their lives because it makes them feel alive, because it connects them to their fathers and grandfathers, because when they ride that bull for 8 seconds, they prove something to themselves. Not to anyone else, to themselves." Weber looked at the old German-American rancher with new respect. "You are a wise man, Herr Mueller." "No," Mueller laughed. "Just an old fool who has lived long enough to understand that different peoples find meaning in different ways. Your people built magnificent cathedrals and composed beautiful music. My adopted people tamed a wilderness and created something new. Both require courage. Both deserve respect." The conversation was interrupted by a child's voice. A little girl, perhaps 5 years old, stood near Otto. She held out a piece of hard candy wrapped in colorful paper. "Mister, do you want some candy?" Otto froze. He looked at the guards, expecting them to pull the child away. Instead, her mother nodded encouragingly. Otto carefully accepted the candy with shaking hands. "Thank you," he said in English. The little girl smiled and skipped away. Otto stared at the candy in his palm, his eyes wet with tears. "She gave me candy," he whispered in German. "The enemy's child gave me candy." Weber felt something crack inside his chest. This was not how enemies behaved. In Russia, civilians spat at German soldiers. In France, they threw stones. But here, a child shared her candy with a prisoner. What kind of people were these Americans? The second half of the rodeo began with team roping, two cowboys working together to catch a steer. Weber watched with analytical interest. The coordination required was impressive. One rider roped the steer's horns while his partner roped the back legs, all at full gallop. Their horses worked together instinctively, maintaining the rope tension perfectly. Good military application, Hans murmured. Cavalry pairs could use similar techniques for prisoners or supplies. But Martinez overheard and shook his head. You're still thinking like soldiers. These men are partners, friends, brothers. They trust each other with their lives, not for war, but for tradition and competition. It is different. The final event was Bull Riding Championship, the most dangerous cowboys competing on the most violent bulls. A massive animal called Tornado entered the arena, and even the announcer's voice carried respect. This bull has never been ridden for 8 seconds. 15 men have tried. 15 men have failed. A cowboy named Chuck Wilson climbed into the chute with Tornado. He was older than the other riders, perhaps 35, with scars visible on his arms. Martinez explained that Wilson was a ranch owner who competed for love of the sport, not money. The gate opened. Tornado exploded upward and twisted in midair, a move Weber had not seen any other bull perform. Wilson held on, his face a mask of concentration and pain. The bull spun left, then right, then kicked both back legs higher than seemed physically possible. 0.3 seconds. For seconds, Wilson's body absorbed punishment that should have knocked him unconscious. 5 seconds. 6 seconds. The crowd rose to their feet, counting loudly. 7 seconds. Tornado reversed direction suddenly, a trick that had unseated everyone else. But Wilson anticipated it. He adjusted his weight a split second before the bull turned. 8 seconds. The buzzer sounded. Wilson released and jumped clear, landing on his feet. Tornado charged at him, but the rodeo clowns intercepted. Wilson ran to safety and climbed the fence as the crowd erupted in deafening cheers. People rushed toward him, including the other cowboys who had failed to ride Tornado. They lifted Wilson on their shoulders and paraded him around the arena. He waved and smiled, blood running from his mouth where he had bitten his tongue. Weber found himself standing and clapping along with everyone else. He did not remember deciding to stand. It simply happened. Beside him, Otto and Hans also stood, applauding this stranger's impossible victory. He did it, Otto said in wonder. He conquered the unconquerable. Martinez grinned at the German prisoners. Now do you understand? This is what we celebrate. Not victory over enemies, not military might, but the human spirit refusing to quit. Courage for its own sake. Excellence simply to achieve excellence. As the crowd began to disperse, local families approached the prisoners, not with hatred or fear, but with curiosity and kindness. They shook hands. They shared food from their picnic baskets. They asked questions about Germany, about the prisoners' families, about their lives before the war. An old rancher named Tom invited several Germans to his truck, where he pulled out cold bottles of Coca-Cola from an ice chest. You boys ever had American soda? They had not. The sweet, fizzy liquid was unlike anything they had tasted. Tom laughed at their surprised faces. Good, ain't it? That's freedom in a bottle, boys. We make it just because we can. The days after the rodeo felt different at Camp Swift. Weber noticed it first in the morning formations. The German prisoners stood straighter, but not with military rigidity. Something had softened in them, or perhaps something had awakened. That night, in the barracks, the 50 men who had attended the rodeo gathered around bunks, sharing the experience with those who had not been selected. Their voices carried excitement instead of the usual depression and homesickness. You should have seen it. Otto told his bunkmate, a quiet soldier named Carl who had been captured in Italy. A man rode a bull called Tornado, a bull that no one had ever ridden successfully. And he did it. For 8 seconds, he achieved the impossible. Carl frowned. But why? What did he gain? Everything, Otto replied, surprising himself with the answer. He gained everything that matters. Pride, respect, the knowledge that he could do what others could not. Weber lay in his bunk, writing in his hidden journal by candlelight. But his words had changed. Before, he had written intelligence reports, tactical observations, and military analysis. Now, he wrote something different. Today I witnessed something I cannot fully explain, he wrote in German. Americans risk their lives not for country or duty, but for sport and tradition. At first, I thought them insane. Now I understand they possess a different kind of courage than we do. We Germans face danger because we are ordered to, because duty demands it. These Americans seek danger freely to prove themselves worthy of their own heritage, which requires more bravery. I'm no longer certain. The next morning, during work detail, Martinez taught Otto how to rope fence posts. The young German had asked repeatedly since the rodeo. Martinez showed him the basic swing, how to build a loop, how to release at the right moment. Otto's first 20 attempts failed completely. The rope tangled or fell short or missed the post entirely. But he kept trying, his face set with determination. On his 21st attempt, the loop settled perfectly over the post. "I did it," Otto shouted, then quickly looked around, embarrassed by his enthusiasm. Martinez clapped him on the shoulder. "You are a natural, amigo. In another life, you might have made a good cowboy." "In another life," Otto repeated quietly, "where there was no war." Hans joined them, watching Otto practice. "Corporal Martinez, may I ask you something?" "That man, Chuck Wilson, who rode Tornado. Why would a rich ranch owner risk his life like that? He has everything to lose." Martinez leaned against the fence. "That is exactly why he rides. Because he has everything to lose. It is easy to be brave when you have nothing, but to risk everything when you have a wife, children, a successful business, that takes a different kind of courage." Wilson rides to remind himself he is still alive, still capable, still the man he was when he had nothing but his skill and heart. The wisdom of this hit Hans like a physical blow. He thought of his own life before the war. He had been a teacher in a small German town. He had a wife, Anna, and a daughter named Greta. He had not seen them in 2 years. Were they still alive? The Allied bombs fell on Germany every night now. The news from home grew worse each week. "I had everything once," Hans said quietly, "and I lost it for a war I did not want to fight." Martinez nodded slowly. "Then survive this, Sergeant. Go home and rebuild. Start again. That is the bravest thing any man can do." Over the following weeks, life at Camp Swift settled into a new rhythm. The German prisoners worked their daily details, but the relationship with the guards had changed. There was less hostility, more conversation. Americans taught Germans how to play baseball. Germans taught Americans card games from Bavaria. Colonel Harrison authorized a second rodeo visit for those who had not attended the first. This time, 50 different prisoners went. When they returned, they spoke of the same wonder and confusion that Weber's group had experienced. One afternoon, Jacob Mueller, the old German-American rancher, visited the camp. He brought his grandson, a boy of 12 named Tommy. Colonel Harrison allowed Mueller to speak with Weber and several other German officers. They sat under a large oak tree, the only shade for miles. Mueller pulled out a photograph, yellowed with age. It showed a young man in German military uniform from the First World War. "My brother, Hans Mueller," the old rancher said. "He fought for Germany in 1914. I fought for America. We shot at each other across no man's land in France. Can you imagine? Brothers on opposite sides, trying to kill each other because politicians decided we were enemies." Weber stared at the photograph. The young soldier looked proud and hopeful, unaware of the horrors waiting in those trenches. "Did he survive?" Weber asked. Mueller shook his head. "Killed at Verdun in 1916. I did not learn about it until 1919. By then, the war was over, and all that death meant nothing. We destroyed a generation of young men for a few miles of muddy ground. And now it happens again," Hans said bitterly. "Another generation. Another war. More death." "Yes," Mueller agreed. "But this time is different. This time, evil must be defeated. Hitler and his Nazis brought this upon the world. You know this is true, even if you cannot say it out loud." Weber met the old man's eyes. Slowly, he nodded. It was the first time he had acknowledged the truth to anyone except himself. Germany had started this war. Germany bore responsibility for the horrors that followed. What happens to us after? Otto asked. When Germany loses, what happens to German soldiers? To our families? Mueller's grandson, Tommy, spoke for the first time. My grandfather says America will help rebuild Germany, just like we helped rebuild after the First War. Because that is what Americans do. We do not destroy our enemies. We make them into friends. The simple faith in the boy's voice moved Weber deeply. Could it be true? Could America really forgive Germany for this terrible war? For the millions dead across Europe? For the evil done in Germany's name? As summer turned to autumn, news from Europe reached the camp. Paris was liberated in August. Allied forces pushed into Belgium and Holland. The Soviet Red Army drove deeper into Eastern Europe. Germany was being crushed from both sides. Some German prisoners celebrated privately, hoping for the war's end. Others grew depressed, knowing their homeland was being destroyed. Weber felt both emotions at once. He wanted the killing to stop, but he dreaded what defeat would mean for Germany's future. In November, Martinez brought newspapers to share with the Germans who could read English. The headline spoke of massive Allied advances. Germany's position was hopeless. Even the most optimistic prisoners admitted defeat was inevitable now. That evening, Otto sat with Weber on the barrack steps, watching the sun set over the Texas plains. The sky turned orange and purple, colors so vivid they seemed unreal. Captain, do you think we will ever come back here? After the war, I mean, as free men. Weber considered the question. A month ago, he would have laughed at the idea. Now, he was not so sure. These Americans had treated them with dignity and respect. They had shared their culture and traditions. They had shown that enemies could become, if not friends, at least fellow human beings worthy of consideration. Perhaps, Weber finally answered, if we survive, if Germany survives, perhaps we could return. To see this strange country that fights wars with one hand and throws rodeos with the other. To understand these people who value freedom and courage so highly they celebrate it even in sport. Otto smiled. I would like that. Corporal Martinez promised to teach me proper roping technique. He says I have potential. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound reminded Weber of wolves in the German forests. But here, the sound carried no menace. It was simply part of the landscape, wild and free. Years later, in 1963, Otto Braun returned to Texas. He brought his wife and 2 children. He had rebuilt his life in Germany after the war, started a business, and prospered in the new democracy. But he never forgot the rodeo or the lessons learned in that Texas prisoner camp. He found Martinez, now an old man himself, running a small ranch outside Bastrop. They embraced like brothers. Martinez took Otto and his family to a rodeo, not as a prisoner this time, but as an honored guest. As Otto watched young cowboys ride bulls and rope calves, he explained to his children what he had learned so many years ago. That courage takes many forms, that enemies can become friends, that the human spirit, whether German or American or anything else, seeks the same things: meaning, purpose, and the chance to prove itself worthy. His daughter asked, Papa, were you scared during the war? Otto thought carefully before answering. Every day, but I learned something important from these Texans. Being brave does not mean not being scared. It means facing your fear and doing what must be done anyway. Whether that is riding a dangerous bull, or surviving a terrible war, or choosing to forgive those who were once your enemies. Martinez overheard and smiled. You learned well, my friend. You learned the real lesson of the rodeo. It is not about conquering the bull. It is about conquering yourself. That night, as fireworks celebrated the rodeo's end, Otto stood between his past and his present. He was a German who loved his country. He was a father building a future. And he was a former enemy who had learned that humanity transcends nationality, that respect transcends conflict, and that understanding transcends war. The rodeo had taught him all of this, though he had not understood it at the time. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes peace begins not with treaties and agreements, but with simple acts of sharing culture, showing respect, and recognizing the common courage that lives in all human hearts. Weber never returned to Texas. He died in Munich in 1959, but he kept his journal from Camp Swift until the end. In its pages, he had written one final entry about the rodeo. Today I learned that Americans are not weak, despite what we were told. They're strong in ways we never imagined. They choose their dangers freely, celebrate courage openly, and forgive their enemies generously. Germany must learn these lessons if we are to have a future. The rodeo continued at Camp Swift through 1945 until the war ended and the prisoners went home. Decades later, historians studying POW camps in America discovered photographs and records of these events. They wondered at the strangeness of it. Enemies watching rodeos, sharing lemonade, learning that the other side was human too. But perhaps it was not strange at all. Perhaps it was the most natural thing in the world. Because courage is universal. Respect is universal. And the human need for connection transcends even the deepest conflicts. In the end, the rodeo was not about bulls or horses or 8 seconds of glory. It was about showing German prisoners that Americans were not the monsters propaganda had painted. It was about planting seeds of understanding that would bloom into friendship after the war ended. It was about remembering, even in the darkest times, that we are all human beings seeking meaning in our brief time on Earth. And sometimes that meaning comes from the most unexpected places, like a dusty arena in Texas, where German prisoners of war discovered that their enemies were just people, brave and foolish and wonderful, riding bulls for no reason except to prove it could be done.